Cami Knight here in the studio. A very good evening to you, Cami. Great to see you. The Russian authorities seem unfazed by the country's plummeting currency, despite it losing a third of its value since August. That sounds incredibly serious.
That's right. Well, when the ruble hits 100 to the dollar, that tends to raise alarm bells in Russia. Well, on Wednesday, it weakened to 114 against the US dollar, its lowest level in over 2 years. That figure is still hovering around 108 this Thursday. But Russian President Vladimir Putin says there's no reason to panic. This, despite the central bank being forced to intervene to prop up the currency. Emily Boyle explains.
After the ruble tumbled to its lowest levels in over 2 years, Russian officials scrambled to spread calm. The currency fell as far as 114.75 to the US dollar on Wednesday, a level unseen since March 2022, just after the start of the war in Ukraine. The Russian central bank was forced to suspend foreign purchases of the ruble for the rest of this year to prop the crushing currency. Vladimir Putin says there's nothing to worry about.
Regarding the fluctuations of exchange rates of the ruble, this is connected not only to inflation, but also to budget payments and oil prices. There are many seasonal factors, so generally, in my opinion, the situation is under control. There is no reason to panic.
Although senior officials were quick to minimize the situation and blame the strength of the dollar, economists say the drop is down to a mix of factors, including low oil prices, new sanctions against Russian businesses, and government spending on the war in Ukraine. Many Russians now struggle to fill their shopping baskets.
The price of butter has gone up. Potatoes and cabbage are really expensive. They are the most sought-for products.
Russia's annual inflation rate came in at 8.5% in October, prompting the central bank to hike interest rates to 21%, the highest level in more than 2 decades, a measure that has yet to halt a persistent rise in prices. The government, meanwhile, is showing no sign of reducing its spending. On Wednesday, it voted to increase its defence budget by a further 30% in 2025.
Australia's Senate has passed a law banning social media for under 16s. It's a world first and is expected to come into force in November 2025, giving social media platforms 12 months to work out how to implement the ban if they want to avoid a steep fine of up to $32 million. It would apply to platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat and TikTok, but not to gaming and messaging platforms that are exempt. But whilst the government secured bipartisan support for the bill, it's drawn a lot of criticism.
The result of a bill that's rushed through within a week is that we have a bill before us where we just don't know how it's going to work. There are fundamental questions that haven't been answered. What's the technical basis of this? What's the scope? How are we going to manage the unintended safety risks that this will pose to young people who may be pushed to darker, less safe parts of the internet in their attempts to get online?
The world will be watching how Australia implements this, as countries like Norway and the UK have already voiced an interest in following suit. Over to Ireland now, where voters are heading to the polls this Friday, and with no party expected to win enough seats to form a majority, another coalition looks inevitable, with centre-right parties Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael largely expected to form the base of the country's next government. But whoever ends up leading the country will be facing a unique set of economic challenges. Ireland has the third largest GDP per capita in the world and has something that's quite rare in the European Union, a budget surplus. The country's low corporate tax rate has enticed US tech giants like Apple, Google and Meta to set up their European headquarters in Dublin. But Donald Trump's return to the White House has raised some concern. His America First policy could threaten Ireland's status as a tax favourite for American companies. Even back at home, despite its strong finances, Ireland isn't exempt from challenges faced across the EU, like the cost of living. Take a listen.
Well, I have 4 adult children living at home with me, so I have an axe to grind with the current government because I don't think they've done enough to deal with the housing problem that we have.
You know, there's a lot going on in Ireland at the moment. We are on paper a very wealthy country. Our GDP is going really well, but the reality for most Dubliners, as is happening to be fair in a lot of European countries, is rent is really high. It's very expensive to buy a house. I'm very fortunate that I'm a high earner in my field. I was originally a lawyer, but even someone like me with a high salary struggles to buy a nice place in Dublin.
The housing crisis a top priority for voters there. Now, one country that isn't dealing with a budget surplus is France. The minority government is trying to pass the budget, which involves 60 billion euros worth of tax hikes and spending costs. But opposition from the left and the far right is threatening to topple the government altogether. Political chaos briefly drove France's borrowing costs to the same level as Greece's for the very first time. Eliza Herbert has more.
As France's government faces a potential no-confidence vote, political instability continues to threaten its finances. And this week saw a significant warning. The indicator known as the spread hit a 12-year high. In the European market, this economic tool measures the gap between a country's 10-year government bond yield against the continent's biggest economy, Germany. On Wednesday, investors were demanding over 3% yields for France, while Germany's number was closer to 2%. The gap between the two countries hit a new record, reflecting a lack of investor confidence in France's credibility.
We currently have the problem of France's exploding deficit. It's not very reassuring for lenders to lend to France, knowing that it's not even managing to balance its own books.
Prior to the dissolution of the National Assembly in June and subsequent snap elections and hung parliament, France was already facing mounting debt. The new Prime Minister Michel Barnier has tried to pass sweeping spending cuts and tax levies to recoup more than 60 billion euros in the budget, but is now facing the threat of a vote of no confidence amid opposition to his belt-tightening plans.
If we don't have a Prime Minister, if we don't have a budget, lack of confidence with regards to French debt will continue to rise. We'll find it harder to finance ourselves and we'll have to pay higher rates, so the burden of debt on the French budget will increase even further.
France is set to have its credit rating reassessed on Friday, with fears it could be downgraded.
Force the budget through by about the 18th of December. We'll be bringing you updates on that.
Indeed, there are many political obstacles to be overcome, aren't there, on that one? Cami, thank you very much indeed. Cami out there with all the business. Great to see you. Thank you. More from Cami, of course, throughout the evening as our programming continues.